Hello. Well, by now, even those of you in the furthest reaches of the civilized world, like maybe America, might have heard that there's a little dust-up going on in Scotland right now. And that's because there's a sort of civil war within the Scottish National Party, which has most of the parliamentary seats in Scotland. Now, in fact, if you expect me to explain to you what they're all shouting about, you're going to be disappointed because, quite frankly, the situation keeps changing. It's a lot of he said, she said, somebody didn't turn up at a meeting and then did turn up at a meeting because they weren't supposed to be there, or perhaps they were supposed to be there and they weren't there, or somebody was accused of, acting inappropriately, and then the in the evidence for what somebody said about something was redacted from the inquiry, so it couldn't be called in evidence during the inquiry. The whole thing is such an incredible mess that it's just, I just don't want to bother with it. I mean, life is too short. We'll let the courts and the various authorities work that one out as far as I'm concerned. But basically, my opinion is that this is what happens in almost any nationalist type party. It starts off with a good idea and then it gets taken over by a bunch of amoral opportunists. And I don't exclude anybody. If you look at the behaviour of the Scottish National Party, from breaking lockdown rules with gay abandon, or, definitely some evidence of one of them being inappropriate with subordinates, and another one of tampering with evidence. It just doesn't seem like there's an honest one among them. It seems like they started the Scottish National Party in order to get power, because they liked that idea and they couldn't get the power if they just joined the ordinary political process. That's basically it, and it's going to attract a certain sort of people. Yeah, I know there are some people who believe deep down that Scotland should have independence, and that's what I'm going to be talking about now, because I think they're wrong, and I want to tell them and anyone else who might be interested why I think they're wrong. I don't pretend to be God, and for that reason, I could be wrong as well, but you can listen to my opinion, can't you? The SNP, in case you don't know, the Scottish National Party, is dedicated to the idea of having Scotland split away from the union it has had with England since the 18th century. It wants to plough its own furrow up there through the icy waters formed by the less than hospitable parts of the North Sea and the Atlantic Ocean. The problem is, one of the main problems, I have mentioned in another video that there are probably great economic difficulties for Scotland as a standalone nation. But the political problem is that the SNP have nothing to recommend their cause but a visceral hatred of the English. They're always blaming the English for everything. And they're always trying to say, well, the English are the evil ones and they're the put upon victims. And as has been demonstrated on so many occasions, no country can survive long on a government that has nothing positive, but only a hatred of its neighbours to run its policies, to sustain itself. Yeah, a hatred like that might draw followers together for a while, but in the end it just starts eating itself, which is what we see happening now. So, look, let's go back to the beginnings of some sort of union. It's not quite one country at this point, but when King James VI of Scotland inherited the crown of England from Elizabeth I. What happened? I mean, this is the sort of thing that's taken for granted, but it by no means should be taken for granted. You see, because as soon as James VI got the message that the Queen had died, long live the King, he immediately started packing his bags and heading for London. Now, after that, he ruled England and Scotland as separate units, but, with the King at the head. He ruled from 1603 until he died in 1625. And he came back to Scotland just once in all that time. Now, he became King of Scotland as a child. He was under a series of regents for a while. He took control in about 1581. And so you could say he was really King of Scotland from 1581 until 1625. And that made him the longest serving King of Scotland ever. And that was because many of the previous ones had died violently at the hands of rivals. Not many people seem to have questioned a situation where the king of one country goes to live in another country and then rules his home country from there. Scotland wasn't a wild land full of bare-skin-clad savages, at that time. It was a country with established diplomatic ties with other governments on continental Europe, an established state religion, and a legal system. It had 3 universities, I believe. It had a proper court and a proper capital city. Why would the king of that country, having been handed the rulership of another country, why would he then go and set up court in that other country and not go back to the first one? Why would he take up residence in London? He didn't know anyone there. He had no friends or family connections. And remember, at that time, monarchs relied on family connections for the loyalty of their close administrators in many cases. So what James did would be like, Texas deciding it wanted to be ruled from Mexico and handing the governance of Texas to President Obrador, is that his name, of Mexico, and then President Obrador, if I've got that name wrong, I'll put a correction, and then President Obrador not staying in Mexico, but setting up court in Austin and allowing Mexico to become a bit of a backwater thereafter. That would seem very weird, wouldn't it? But it seemed quite natural for James to set up shop in London. So it really wasn't natural at all. Well, he did that for several reasons. The first was England was a richer and more developed country. It wasn't ruled by clan chieftains, for instance. There was a lot of that in Scotland. And church potentates, the Calvinist ministers, were very powerful. And between the two of them, the constant jockeying for position frequently ended up in riots and sectarian violence. So there was that problem. England was a place where, and this is probably more important, it was a place where political assassination was less likely. It was still a possibility, but it was far less likely than in Scotland. There had been several attempts on James's life, or at least his liberty, and there was a constant threat of him being kidnapped by one faction or another in an attempt to seize control. In short, Scotland, despite the strict, the overbearing Calvinism of the established church, was far more stuck in the Middle Ages than England was. England was a place, it also had great institutions of learning. There was more trade, more cultural life, more theatre and music, and more of a rule of law. And that's the important thing. In short, England was a better place to be a king. It was far more secure. Now, The last time I spoke about the fuss surrounding the Scottish National Party, I got a comment under the video from someone along the lines of, "I'm sorry that you feel that way about the Scots." I assume he meant that I thought badly of the Scots, and he couldn't be more wrong. In the 19th century, when the Scots were well integrated into the United Kingdom and not constantly making themselves into victims, the Scots participated just hugely in the building of the British Empire, and much to their own advantage financially and culturally. Scottish engineers built bridges, Scottish shipbuilders provided the means to put British sailors, settlers and administrators all over the world. Scottish soldiers formed some of the fiercest and most efficient regiments in the army. Scottish philosophers and economists wrote the blueprint for the empire's financial and philosophical management. Scottish authors wrote our myths and our histories. And one of the greatest storytellers in the English language was Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, after all. And even the highest offices in the land have been occupied by Scots, haven't they? Gladstone, Bonar Law, Balfour. I'm sure I've missed. I've probably missed a whole lot. I'm sure there were a lot more. Well, yeah, even bloody Tony Blair. You can't be right all the time, I suppose. So, with that knowledge behind me, how could I possibly have a poor opinion of the Scots? What I have a poor opinion of is the present Scottish government and the mythology that the Scots are coming up with now about their victimhood. As a matter of fact, going back to all the list I made before, all those Scots, well, most of those Scots that I was talking about had their great successes in England. I know that's unpalatable for the Scottish nationalists, if there are any watching this, but just look at the statistics for sure. After the English suppressed any sort of Scottish rebellion, and with great cruelty, in the 18th century, they then set about facilitating the building of Scotland's great cities and supporting its institutions of learning. Now, that also seems natural, but it isn't natural. Remember, there are many instances where one country has subdued a rebellious area and then completely destroyed it, destroyed their economy, dispersed their people, and reduced their culture to rubble. I mean, if you look at what the Romans did to the Carthaginians, they seeded their fields with salt so they could never come back. And the American North, just look what they did to the South after the Civil War. Again, the integration of Scottish culture, the people, the institutions into a British society is simply taken for granted, but it mightn't have been like that at all if the English had been as vindictive and evil as the Scottish National Party would like to seem to paint it. The fact is that the English needed the Scots, but the Scots needed the English. The Scots may now have a burning resentment, but that doesn't stop them from taking the high road to London and prospering from it in droves. That's why I don't believe that the Scots would do well if they ever attained independence, which is unlikely anyway. And that's for two reasons. The first is that the Scottish National Party is like a bunch of undergraduates scrapping with each other about who gets to be chairman of the Students' Union. And when I saw that embarrassingly immature and childish way that they acted when they burst into the House of Commons a couple of elections ago, I knew these guys had about as much, political finesse as a set of toddlers let loose in a Montessori kindergarten, and all you Scots should be ashamed of them. And that childishness is just replaying itself in Holyrood, isn't it? And the second reason is this. Looking through Scottish history, and I do not know why, but one of the most prominent characteristics of Scottish political life is a tendency to conduct internecine feuds that destroy their ability to govern. It's not just a case of sturgeon against salmon. It's been happening since the 9th century. It's about time the Scots came to terms with that. Just seems to be part of the cultural background. Just as the English have always profited from an association with Scotland, so the Scots have always profited from an association with England. I don't know, one calms the other down. I don't know, but it seems to happen like that. You just look through history, stop making up new history and look at what's happened. Look at the national characteristics and see how this works. That is not going to change anytime soon. Why not treat yourself or a favoured relative or friend to these magnificent examples of merch? The mugs and T-shirts come in the Graniopteryx design or Granbo with a firearm or the more deadly knitting needles. Go to www.graniopteryx.com and whatever platform you're watching this on, please click like, subscribe and share.